So and I'll try to keep you guys kind of full screen here so I can see. Let me go here. Yeah. So I'll be able to see it. So wave a hand, shut me down, and we'll go there. But you guys can see my slides, right? Thumb up.
Yep.
We're good? All right, fantastic. Okay, so there's a lot going on here. When you start thinking about relationship of soil fertility and water, in one, you guys got a lot more slides than I'm actually going to talk about. I thinned that slide deck down. I'll also say right before I sent that slide deck, I'd been on a significant amount of painkillers, so it made no sense once I looked back over it. So I kind of slimmed it down. Wave at me and we'll have a conversation. I'm doing this first because really when I get into this, one of the things I want to talk about is just nitrogen and how it works, because we got a lot going on, but really once we start pushing water, and I'll say this later, once we start pushing water, the expectations is we grow more, right? I mean, we better grow more because you got to pay for the system, you got to pay for the water, you got to pay for the power that pushes the water. And with that increase of yield, we're expecting an increase in nitrogen use. This right here, if y'all have seen me talk before, you've probably seen this. I teach a class called Soil Fertility. It's senior grad level. This is my nitrogen cycle that the kids are supposed to, they're 20-something. So the students are supposed to be able to take a blank sheet of paper and recreate this nitrogen cycle down to the positive and negative charge. I typically don't like regurgitation and memorization, but the nitrogen cycle is so complex and so important that I do have them do that. And so I want to point out some things. And so the green boxes are where we get nitrogen from. Into fixations, that's your legumes, that's your blue-green algae, that's your soybean, your alfalfa. Industrial fixation and fertilization, that's the Haber-Bosch. That does us applying fertilizer. Lightning and rainfall, I mean, sometimes we don't get rain for 200 days, I get that, but when we do get rain and we get lightning, we're still pulling 3 to 6 pounds an acre per year in nitrogen. It's not much, but that contributes to the system. And then plant and animal residues. So this is really where we start thinking about no-till, manure use, and do I have access to swine effluent, to beef manure or litter or anything along those lines. There are 3 sinks: the microbial, the nitrate, and the atmosphere. And our loss pathways in the yellow boxes. And so leaching, where you guys are at, I don't really put leaching as a high concern for most of you all. Leaching is not the first concern I have for your country. I do think a lot about ammonia volatilization. Denitrification is one that your numbers aren't going to be high, but every time that pivot goes over the ground and wets the soil, you're gassing off probably 1 pound to 3 pounds every single time with denitrification. That is, and we've seen that even in dry land in Oklahoma. You get half an inch of rain and the system kicks itself up and spins up, and we get a little denitrification. Does it add up to economic loss? No. But when you start talking about greenhouse gases, it adds up there. One that a lot of folks don't talk about is this plant loss. Show of hands, anybody grow wheat? Sorghum? Does it ever get hot later in the season when you're growing wheat and sorghum? That would be a yes. Effectively, those 2 crops significantly are really good at being arid because they take up extra nitrogen, so that if the environment turns off good, it can utilize the nitrogen. The problem with that is it has extra nitrogen, so when the environment turns hot and dry, it's got too much. And so we've been able to show that in wheat, dryland wheat, if we get a hot period during grain fill and pieces to grain fill, we can gas off anywhere between 10 and 70 pounds of nitrogen because it had excess accumulation. We can manage some of that with water. That's one of the pathways that we don't think about. But all that, and the big reason why I put it up here, is all that surrounding organic matter, which is the one thing, if you think about it, the one thing that you're able to do with irrigation is take that dry land ground, which when it's farmed heavily, you guys are down. I'm going to guess your organic matter is between 0.75% and 1% in dry land, especially if it's tilled dry land. Would that be safe enough to say? In that country, 1% dry land, farmed ground. Under irrigation, though, even under farmed irrigation, probably able to push to 1.5 to 2, just because you're putting more roots in, you're putting more carbon in, and able to push that. And then if we start talking about no-till and strip tilling in that system, and I ought to be able to push 2.5 to 3 after some good, thoughtful years of rotation. But in that organic matter, every 1% of organic matter in your soil holds about 1,000 pounds of nitrogen. And so that's a significant aspect if we look at it. If I can take the ground from 1% to 2%, that means on an annual basis, I can release a significant amount more nitrogen for the crop benefit. I also got to contribute, say that if I'm going from 1 to 2%, I've got to let the system have an extra 1,000 pounds of N to tie up. Has to come from fertilizer, has to come from legumes, or has to come from manures, because I can't do it for free. So to build organic matter, it takes nitrogen and carbon, and it should make our system a little bit more stable, but it makes it a little bit more complicated, not knowing what's going to come out of it. I get into all of that and say, all right, let's talk about the real system. That if I want to talk about fertility, the nitrogen, I'm talking corn, cotton, wheat, sorghum. This is an old equation. It was the Stanford equation is from 60s, 70s. In my head, it makes sense. So I like to be able to map things out mechanically. So this is a very mechanistic approach to nitrogen. It's not models. It's not any of those other things. It's that if I know the nitrogen in my crop, meaning the nitrogen taken up by the crop minus the nitrogen taken up in the soil, so that's either the soil's providing it or the soil's taking it away. And we'll talk about that. That could be a positive or a negative. And then an efficiency of fertilizer, then I can figure out my fertilizer rate. And so 3 fairly basic numbers: crop, soil, and efficiency. The problem is none of those 3 are that easy to hit. Now, given water gives us a little bit more advantage because our crop is more consistent. You know, my dryland corn might average 140, but it's a range of 60 to 180. At least my irrigated, for the most part, I used to say irrigated is fairly consistent, but we've had some rough years. Irrigated should be running 240 to 260, fairly consistent. My yield's consistent. It seems the last couple of years with the heat we get and other issues, even my irrigated has become much more inconsistent, where I've been running 200 to 300. Well, the difference between a 200 bushel corn crop and 300 bushel corn crop is pretty significant. Same thing on the cotton side. With that, the soil, we look at the soil. Most of us are looking at the soil as a 6-inch slice, right? We look at the soil, we have 6 inches of soil. We might have soil moisture meters deeper, but show of hands, how many of you take soil samples to 4 foot deep every year? That's exactly what I thought. How many go to 2 foot deep? Okay. When you put a corn crop in the ground or a cotton crop in the ground, are you hoping it goes past 18 inches to search for water and nutrients? Kind of do. What's the chances that you've got nitrogen at depth? Might be okay. We're going to talk about some of the data we've seen later about how much is down there. And by no means do I ever recommend anybody to do deep nitrogen sampling. But if I look at the price of corn and cotton and I look at the price of fertilizer, that cost of a deep sample this year, it probably makes more sense than it has in many years in the past. So Stanford equation: crop, soil, and efficiency. I like to break into Stanford. So basically, Beagle and Morrell put this out, and I just shared this. I don't want us to get into it, but they make the simple equation much more complicated. They start adding a lot of stuff in there. We start talking about organic carbon, residual carbon, manure, inorganic, organic, legume, all these things, and they add all these parameters, and they go even further in getting even heavier yield models. And we're talking about all the theoretical models that are out there, and we've got weather models. minerals, soil quality, ppn, so pre-plant nitrates, soil test, all these parameters, all these values added to an equation that had three components. Remember, we had crop, soil, and efficiency. Now the problem with this is that these were two soil scientists. And if you look at the equation, we still have crop and we have efficiency. All these other parameters dropped in are just for the nitrogen aspect of the soil equation because it's that complex. That's why we don't get a lot of people that do pre-plant nitrogen in their soil samples, because a lot of labs don't run it anymore, because if you take soil sample today, it's not going to be the same nitrogen as it will be in 3 months, because it will have rained, it will have not rained, it will have gotten hot, it will have gotten dry. Something would have happened to manipulate that organic matter nitrogen cycle, or losses or additions. And so nitrogen testing is kind of a picture in time. And so they're trying to get that. But I'll go back to say, if you gave the same equation to a crop physiologist, this aspect right here, the yield, they're going to have that many aspects or more. They're going to look at light intensity. They're going to look at genetics. They're going to have planting date. They're going to have planting density. All of these aspects that go into the yield. So the challenge with nitrogen is that it's three simple numbers that take a whole lot to actually get to. I want to ask you this just to think about it. I know you can't answer me. How confident are you at being plus or minus 5 bushel of final yielding corn, or plus or minus 1/10 of a bale of cotton before you put the seed in the ground? You guys comfortable to say that you can be plus or minus 5 on a quarter section, plus or minus 30-40 pounds of lint on a quarter pivot before you put the seed in the ground? Probably not. When are you comfortable about yield? I tell the students in my class, I'm only comfortable about yield is when it's in the combine and made it to the grain bin. Otherwise, I really don't know what the final yield's going to be. Great example is this year. Man, we had beautiful spring season this year. We had all the rain we could ever want. I had dry land looking like it was going to bust 220. I had irrigated that looked like it was easily over 300 bushel. And guess what? As soon as I hit about R3, R4, it got hot and dry, and the whole thing withered away. We still had great yields, but I'm pretty sure I lost 15-20% off the top. And where I should have been at 300 bushel, I was at 260, and where I should have been at 220 on the rain-fed dry land, I was shelling 180. And that was counting rows and ends and rows about how much I was setting. I just didn't finish out. We lost that much, and so yield and what's removed is always in flux in the system. You never quite know where you're going to be at. So we go back to the Stanford equation, just re-showing that, and there's a lot of effort put on the soil, a lot of effort put on the crop. The thing that's a little bit challenging is we don't put on efficiency. If you ask a lot of soil scientists, we just kind of roll the dice and say, put 60% on it. But you guys there have the capability to really change that number. Are you talking flinging out urea, unprotected urea, and letting it sit on the surface for a week and a half? Or are you going to knife in anhydrous or put on your liquid and water it in? When you have the addition of irrigation, you can make this value, which for most rain-fed, I want to tell you is 50%, maybe 60% best case scenario, meaning that I put 100 pounds on, I get 60 pounds to go back in the plant. At least with irrigation, I can protect myself against a lot of those losses I expect on a rain-fed environment. And so I can take that number to 60 or 70. And so on corn, instead of thinking 1.2 pounds of N per bushel, most of my high-playing corn guys, they ought to be at 0.9 or less. In fact, in the systems they're at, I want them to be at 0.85 pounds of N per bushel corn, because they've got that kind of efficiency with their nitrogen. And it goes back to this big thing right here, is that most of them aren't leaching. It's a deep silt loam, not a lot of the deep sands. So whatever does get pushed down early tends to be brought back up as we start drying out in the season. We don't go a lot out of the system. Ammonia volatilization is, for the most part, reduced because not a lot of surface application, especially if we're talking strip till, and we don't have a lot of nitrous because it is below that ground. So the loss pathways that get us to that 1.2 pounds of N per bushel corn only needs 0.76, 0.8 pounds per bushel. That other 4/10 was basically CYA. It's accounting for an inefficiency in your crop. Same thing with wheat. 2 pounds N per bushel wheat is what OSU recommends. And the reality is a wheat crop only needs 1.6, 1.65 pounds of N per bushel. Why 2? Because we're inefficient. Dropping gas in the ground in July to grow wheat that needs it in February and March is extremely inefficient. And so we put 2 pounds of N per bushel. Just by changing my timing on that nitrogen, I could pull that N back to 1.7, 1.8. If I'm doing irrigated wheat and I can manage the water on that wheat, there's no way I'm using 2 pounds of N per bushel. At least 1.8. And I could probably skinny it down beyond that to be much more efficient. And so I say that about it. Think about your guys' acres. If you can pull back your corn from 1.2 to 0.8, or maybe you're at 1.0 pounds and go to 0.8, that's 0.2 of a pound per bushel. It might not sound much, but if you're shooting 250 bushels across a couple thousand acres, that does start adding up, especially with corn price the way it is and fertilizer price the way it is. And so think now, how can you skinny up those margins? You might not get better for doing this number or this number, but because of the system you're at, you definitely can be better at the efficiency and adjust some of those values and make some pretty good headway on that one and save some money. One of the things I want to kind of dive into also is, now I understand this is rain-fed data and we're talking irrigated systems. I just don't have the same amount of years under irrigation, but I see the same results. And I'm sorry, this got copy draw crossed on the wrong freaking graph, but just know that these bars right here, this is 30 bushel, this orange bar is 30 bushel, and this orange bar right here is 90 bushel. So just know basically 30, 60, 90, 246 is 30, 60, 90. That is the yield and economic optimum N rate, with the black bar being the N rate. And so this black up here is 100 pounds of N and 8 pounds of N and 64, 20, 0. One thing that I like to point out is that high yield doesn't necessarily mean high nitrogen, and low yield doesn't necessarily mean low nitrogen. We have years that it changes. This gray bar down here is kilograms per ton. How many kilograms it took to make a ton of wheat. You can change that back to pounds of N per bushel. And the range on this goes from 0, right here, this is 0 pounds of N per bushel to make this one, to this one right here, this 2010. This year, it took us 3.4 pounds of N to make an economic bushel at 30 bushels. Also one of the first years to implement no-till. You see, we implemented no-till in 2010, actually the fall 29. This was no-till, no-till, no-till. And look at our nitrogen requirements per bushel. Going into no-till, as I said earlier, really forced us into needing a lot more nitrogen because we're creating organic matter. We took this field in 2010, it had 0.6 of a pound, or 0.6% organic matter. By 2019, we had 2.5% organic matter. And so we basically had to build that organic matter with extra nitrogen. And as we get this data and we look at it, we end up, if we average over all the years, we needed about 1.6 pounds of N per bushel on average, but year to year that ran between 0 and 3 pounds. Challenge on my side is I don't want to tell you 1.6 is every year, because some years we're going to need more. Some years we're more efficient. Some years we're better at getting it. Some years we're not. And we see the same thing in in corn and in irrigation, which is why we're going to get into the timing. One great value that we have under irrigated systems is the opportunity to fertilize more than just pre-plant. And a big thing that I like to push and understand is that this is V6. By V6, less than 10% of the nitrogen that is going to be used is taken up by the crop. But that's usually when we have 100% of our nitrogen available. And one of the aspects, if you're watching a blog, we're kind of getting this conversation on the OSU NPK blog, is that how many of you heard that the crop cannot be limited at V6 because that's when it sets its genetic potential. That's when the crop sets its yield potential is at V6. Anybody ever heard that before?
Yeah.
Couple? Okay. How much nitrogen does a crop need by V6? You can have a 400 bushel crop yield, and at V6 that plant's only used 30 or 40 pounds of N. So you don't need, the point is, you don't need 100% of the nitrogen at V6 for the final yield. You need the nitrogen a V6 plant needs, which is only 10% of the total. So you only need 20, 30, 40 pounds by V6 to have full potential. That means we could really give some time. So even by R1, we're seeing by R1, we've only got 60 to 70% of the nitrogen taken up by R1. By that point, if I'm at R1, the nice thing about R1 is I've got a pretty good idea of how the system's looking by then, especially if I can fertigate on. I can really start thinking about how has the weather been, how has the soil been, what's the market like? Has the corn market gone up enough where I want to invest any money? Has the corn market gone down and I don't need to spend another dime on this crop and let it play out? With the ability to fertigate on and knowing that I only need 60% of my total nitrogen on by R1 really lets me play around with making those adjustments to save some money on nitrogen fertilizer. That's where the interaction of nitrogen and water comes in, as we can really kind of start manipulating our nitrogen management to try to take advantage of the fact that we don't need it early. I know running everything on up front, the positive of running it up front is it's at a time of year that you're not doing a whole lot of anything else. And of course, in season is when you're busy trying to manage fungicide, you're trying to keep wells running, you're trying to do all the other things. And I would say 95% of the years, I completely get it. And I'd say just put on cheap gas up front because you need that time the rest of the season. Challenging that this year is a show of hands, who in here is going to get rich off of corn this year? Who's penciled out making $700, $800 an acre on a corn crop this year? Who's making $800 an acre on a cotton crop this year? It doesn't pencil well. So I'm looking at how can I get as little as input into this crop as possible, still get as much grain and yield out as possible, so that at least on the books that I've been doing, the folks that I'm trying to make the red as small as red as possible. And honestly, that's not putting cheap gas down early, because I can let the season play out a little bit longer and start making some better management decisions. And it's hard in rain fed because I'm always told, well, we don't know if it's going to rain it in. At least in irrigated ground, I can say, well, I can at least get it in and make some of those decisions better. And my argument on the rain is, if it doesn't rain in the nitrogen, the crop's dead anyway, so I probably didn't want the nitrogen on in the first place, which is a situation. Wheat, I know, not the biggest crop to worry about under irrigation, but I do a lot of wheat, so I want to throw this out. Sorry, I'm changing my heating pad here. Throw this out, is that by jointing, we've only taken out 20% of the nitrogen. Unless I'm in a grazing system and I've planted early and I'm growing a lot of wheat to graze, I've only pulled 20% of the total nitrogen out. In fact, by flowering, I'm still 80%. That wheat crop takes up a significant amount of nitrogen after jointing. Basically, it's still a significant amount after flag leaf. We're talking flag leaf is somewhere in here where I've still got a significant amount of nitrogen still left to pull out. And most of it's occurring that post-flowering. And so again with wheat, especially, I mean, look, wheat price, I got a lot of folks that see a rain coming right now and get really excited about spending money on a wheat crop, and I'm looking at the market saying, I don't know. Prove to me you need nitrogen before going fling it out on stuff that's still got 30 days until jointing. Let's see where we go before we start dropping money in on it. Soil test, this kind of goes through preseason, in-season. You know, there's a lot of folks that do. Does anybody in here do in-season soil test nitrate? Okay, I don't do it myself. I think it's a whole lot of work. I'm not sure if I would do it. I don't think it goes deep enough. But the pre-plant sample, I'm not the biggest fan of pre-plant nitrogen sample because I've already told you guys, I don't know what's in there. I don't want to be, if the soil test tells me I have 12 pounds, that's one thing. I'm going to say, okay, I have a couple pounds. I look at a soil test nitrate is that, am I low, medium, or high? If I've got 10, I don't have a lot in the system. If I've got 100, I've got to bunch the system. I don't look at absolute numbers when it comes to soil test nitrogen because it doesn't give me just an absolute value that I can depend on. I know that it's going to rapidly change throughout the season. Been a lot of folks that's worked on mineralization. This is old school. This is Illinois soil test nitrate. We were putting soil in on, this is actually from OSU. It's mason jars and hot plates to see how much gas is evolved. I've done a crap ton of mineralization as far as soil health indicators. Here's the problem. I don't know the temperature of the field and the soil moisture of the field, so therefore I can't predict mineralization because mineralization is 100% driven by soil temperature and water content. At least under irrigation, the water is a little bit consistent, and at least where you guys are in Texas, the consistency of temperature is hot, freaking hot. So you at least know you're hot and you have some moisture. But otherwise, the whole parameters I need to really gauge the mineralization of what's going to happen in that organic matter is still tough to hit because we don't know the distribution of that rainfall or that moisture in the profile. And I've talked about this, I'm just reiterating, I guess, on this one, is that this is where I do think a lot of your gains can be made in tweaking your nitrogen recommendation. I'm trying to think of the best way to ask this. Are you guys on corn at a pounds per acre per bushel? And is it 1.2 or 1? What would be the common approach for your area? Is it 1 pound of N per bushel corn?
We figure 1 pound of N.
1 pound? Do you ever change it because you do something like add a MBPT or knife it in or go in season, or is it always just 1?
It's always been 1.
We can make adjustments. I can go out to your ground and say, you know what, this deep sand, it's probably not 1. It's probably more than that if I put it on at once up front. Heavy clay, probably going to be worse than 1. But if I manage it and I'm in a silt loam that's deep, that doesn't get a lot of leaching, and I consider some in-season apps, that number could easily be rolled down to a 0.8 or 0.9. And so I look at that Stanford equation as what part of that system, what part of that equation can I do better at making management decisions on? Can I do better at estimating my crop yield or that nitrogen uptake? Can I do better at predicting the nitrogen in the soil? Or can I, the fertility, the efficiency portion of that equation to maybe gain a few dollars here and there by saving some nitrogen, because I know I'm on, right? I know, or maybe I know this piece of ground is just a heavy user of nitrogen and it needs to be 1.1, while this piece of ground is my good ground, it probably be skimming down to 0.85. That's where you can start tweaking and manipulating your soil test and really start, or your soil recommendations, and hopefully start making some headway in the system. Sorry, I wanted to get into some stuff we've learned as far as fertility and crop demand, and this is some stuff we've done from the TAPS. UNL had, I think Texas has the TAPS now, where we looked at farmer rates, really trying to dig in. We've done this out in the high plains, where this pivot over here, each one of those colors is an N rate. Red is a 0 N. And then across the pivot into pies, you see the pies right here. Those are water rates. So we looked at nitrogen rate by water, basically 125% ET, 100% ET, and a 75% ET rate across 5 rates of nitrogen across the lots of fans. So we got a lot of data in it. Just so you know what it looks like. It is an absolute nightmare digging into this stuff, looking at it. Just more graphs of how we managed it. We did a lot of breaks. There's our water pies, there's our nitrogen pies, a ton of GIS in here. Just to show you that at Tassel, you could see our zeros. So this was really cool to see that, we had nitrogen deficiency in these pivots. Got some great information on here. And just want to show you our results. And this is where the fertility by water comes in. If I have more water, do I need more nitrogen? I get that question like, if I'm cutting back on my water, do I cut back on my nitrogen rate? In this year right here, in our first year, we look at these rates and we look at the yields. Water significantly influenced our yield, especially at the lower rates. But the higher rates, really as we fertilized more, we saw less influence of water, which we don't quite know. But you also see that this is a 1 1/4. This is the optimum rate. The gray is the high rate, and the orange is the low rate. And so it all goes in here. In the end, on that year, nitrogen rate didn't change depending on how much water we put on. We go to it, and this is our big problem. This is the average of all of these. We've got curves like this N rate steady right here, so everyone is considered a little N rate steady. Our zero ran from 140 pounds or 140 bushel to 220 bushel. Remember, it's from this corner to this corner, and the non-fertilized is running between 140 and 220. So we have an 80 bushel swing on the zeros. And these aren't our little bitty plots. We're talking a plot is 12 rows wide by 100 feet long, basically. And so we've got a huge range in the checks. Even at the top end, are well fertilized, which optimum, I'd say we probably topped out at about 200 pounds of N is minimum rate, giving us anywhere between 200 and 250 bushel. We got a big range in this. Even on the low end, we have a huge response right here. We go from 140 bushel to 200 bushel, but it's still on the low end of the curve. Our higher part of the curve, we have a nice response, but the average it together, we had about 20% of the plots, the optimum rate of nitrogen was 100 pounds. We had 60% the optimum rate was 200 pounds, and we had another 10% the optimum rate was 250. That's all within one circle. There's our nice average. We get in here, here's 2019. 2019 had a huge impact on water. You see 1 inch, 1 1/4, 1 1/2. You also see that the distance in between those are about the same. So that crop in the season, the economic rate, we honestly didn't really plateau out. We kind of hit around the 220 mark, but we were still raising. We might have needed more nitrogen than we had. We might have needed, this is 280, we might have needed 320, even producing 175. This is really inefficient. 270 pounds of N to make 200, not even 200 bushel. So water and nitrogen, yeah, I cut back my water. How do we explain this? I don't know. There's a lot of the interactions happening here where the stress is that we have an uptake, so we're probably influencing late season fill by not having enough water at the end of it. And so we still have some crop response, but we're not getting the full fill to really get this curve to push itself on up. And this is what the biplots look like, the bi-trial look like, just a messy bit of. In 2020, this is a year where we effectively grew 220 corn on 60 pounds of N. That was the optimum rate. I want you also to see that irrigation, we needed some, but it really wasn't significant. Irrigation really didn't have much of an impact this year. And I think that's important to know. See, we'll go back here. So we got checks. Checks are, let's just say, averaging 150. Check is about 160. And these checks are averaging 180. Is interesting in 2020 in that this year started out dry. Put the seed in the ground, and it really didn't rain until about V6, V7. Started irrigating until then. So got perfect germination, came up. In 2019, when we needed a lot of water, it actually rained a lot after planting. This crop had a significant amount of rains that occurred after planting, where we put it in the ground, got it up, got half an inch, a couple days later, quarter inch, a couple days later, half an inch. And note that the year that we had great spring rains, we needed a lot more irrigation and a lot more nitrogen. And the year that we had limited spring rains and decent rain in the summer, we didn't need as much irrigation. And we also didn't need as much nitrogen. Which goes to one of the things we're looking at right now. What are we doing to the roots of these crops? Our guess on why this happened in this year right here, we got lazy. There's a lot of green snap that came in the region that the crop just came over. The first windstorm we got at V10, V11, it blew right over. Why? All the rains. Corn can be a lazy, stinking crop. So can cotton, so can wheat. If it's got the moisture and it's got the nutrients in the surface, there's no reason for it to root down, and it sits there, and then it needs all the water and all the nitrogen it can get because it's not exploring. In a year like this one, without any significant rainfall, it's chasing its roots down. These are the same fields, by the way. We're just moving, popping circles back and forth. We're going to this circle, and we go to a circle down here, just moving back and forth. So it's not like we're moving a significant area. That's not stress, but lack of excessive made the crop work a little bit. And we believe made it a much stronger crop and made it access deeper amounts of water and nitrogen, giving us really it doesn't need near as much because of that. That we didn't need but 60 pounds to make 2 bushel, and we didn't need full water either to hit the optimum rates. One of the take-homes on the nitrogen that I try to get across, that I want you guys to get, is this: that nitrogen is related to yield. 200 bushel corn takes more than 300 bushel corn. 3 bale cotton takes more than 5 bale cotton. Easy, we know this. Nitrogen fertilizer, that Stanford equation, is a combination of yield and soil. Okay? The soil is all about the environment. Mineralization, immobilization, losses, and pathways. The problem is our environment is not stable. So therefore, we go back if then, but since the environment's not stable, the soil nitrogen proportion is not stable, and therefore the nitrogen fertilizer is not stable, because this is 50% of the equation. So we shouldn't be doing 250 pounds of N every single year because we're growing 250 bushel corn. We should be looking at what's in the system, making it more efficient, and tying the system in and saying, how can I be more efficient? Is it on the better yield prediction? Is it on better nitrogen sampling? Or is it just getting my efficiencies zoned in where I know how much I need to produce a bushel of corn or a bale of cotton? And that goes back to the missing component. I look at it this way, and this is a slide I use whether I'm in Oklahoma, Illinois, or Texas, is if I'm a consultant, if I'm a farmer, and the folks I'm working with right now, this is what I tell them is like, where can we do a better job at? Do I know that I'm going to make 250 bushel corn every year? If so, then I want to do better at efficiency in soil. If I have no freaking clue what I'm going to yield, then I'm going to do something that allows me to get a better idea of what I'm going to yield. That might just be wait. Don't do it immediately. Let the weather and let the environment happen a little bit so I get a better idea of crop nitrogen. Is it the soil that I don't know about? Then maybe I'll look at a deep sampling. Do I have anything at depth that I can really utilize for later on? And then we have the efficiency. I do think no matter what your system, you can probably tweak that efficiency based upon landscape, based upon texture, based upon when and how you apply the fertilizer to tweak that number and try to get a couple tenths of a pound per bushel down. If you just think about how much corn and cotton you produce, just taking a few tenths of a pound of in per bushel off can, in the long run, have some pretty significant down-road wins. This is always my challenge when I talk nitrogen, so I want to acknowledge it. Have you guys seen the pig tooth conundrum as far as business goes? Meaning that the three options are, I want it cheap, I want it fast, and I want high quality. Have you guys seen the cheap, quality, and timeliness conundrum? Basically, if I want it fast and I want it cheap, there's no way the product that I'm going to get is going to be of a high quality. If I want high quality and I want it fast, I better be willing to pay a lot for it. You can always have two. You can't ever get three because it just doesn't work. And so that's very much the same thing about nitrogen. We can be efficient and we can be at low risk of economic loss, of losing yield. But the probability is I'm not that economic, meaning I have to do a source of fertilizer that's more expensive, or I have to make more trips with the sprayer that's less economic. And so being efficient and having low risk of yield loss means that my economy is harder to break. It basically, if I want to be economic and low risk, I just go out there with a crap ton of anhydrous and not worry about it. I just give up efficiency. If I want to be economic and efficient, I'm probably going to have some risk, meaning I have to wait. I have to make some judgment calls. Whether that risk is real or not, there's a lot of folks that I work with on nitrogen management that after a while, they say, I can't do it. It's impossible. It's not going to rain. I can't get over the ground, this or that. Then after they try it on a field or two and they start expanding across fields, they realize that what they thought was a real risk was more of a perceived risk. They just thought it was a risk, and it wasn't actually something that was happening to them. And so, like I said, it's like the dry land winter wheat ground. If I don't put it on in December, I can't get across the field again. Well, that's a perceived risk and maybe not a realized risk every year. Let's see. Man, if we have time and you guys want me to dig into this, I can dig much further into this. But this is my statement on biome. And I have no doubt there's somebody in the crowd I'm going to irritate. So I apologize, but I'm not there for you to guys run me out of the building. So I have been working with no-till. I've been working with biologicals for about 20 years now. Always looking at how can we work with and even manipulate the soil biome. The soil biome is what is giving us mineralization, is what's giving us soil health, is what's giving us all those components of the soil system that we want. Looking at, is it a practice or is it a product? Meaning, is it something I do in practice that impacts the biome, or is it a product that I add that impacts the biome, the microbial community? And really the same question is, can I do it with native biome, or do I have to introduce something? Do I do it with practice, or do I buy a jug? And I've got a ton of data I can switch to and share with you guys, but my answer is, I have absolute faith in your ability to manage your soil, that you improve the soil conditions, the soil biome, through crop rotation, no-till, strip-till, management of those styles. I know it, I've proved it, we can do it. I have no limited hope that you can do it with something in a jug at a pint of acre. Meaning, you can impact your soil more effectively and at a greater level with what you do as far as agronomists and managers than you can by buying something and spraying it on the ground or putting it in furrow. And that's just 20 years of work with them in wheat, corn, cotton, sorghum, soybean, and the other things. And I've got the data that shows that. And I have learned from working in soil that is Superfund sites where we remove all the native soil, bring in new, completely treated soil to find out that the native biome is really freaking strong. It is crazy. And our plants, the biome will react to what our soil is, meaning our microbial pool is exactly what the soil and the plants need at that moment for those conditions. If I introduce a new plant, it will signal for the biology it needs. It might take a year, but by the second time it plants, the soil has a memory that it has had soybean or it's had sunflower in the system, and those microbes will be back. You don't introduce the microbes. You have to make the soil better by not tilling the bejesus out of it 5 times a year. Don't have restless tillage syndrome and go over that ground with the plow, the chisel, the disc, the cultivator, and then the cultipacker. That's right. Do strip till, do min till, do reduce till, do crop rotation, get different roots in there, and the biology will respond. Do we got any coyote hunters in the group? Do you guys even have coyotes? I assume there's coyotes. Any coyote hunters? All right, so this is the best thing that I see when it comes to explaining a lot of the biome. Our soil is no different than coyotes and rabbits. When the rabbit population booms, you got a good rabbit season, what happens to the dog seasons? Or the dog pop goes up. What happens when the dog pop keeps going up? Rabbit population crashes, dog population crashes, right? It is a boom-bust cycle. Predator-prey, boom-bust cycle. I don't really care what predator or what prey. It is a boom-bust cycle. That's exactly what we're doing in our soils with microbes and carbon. You can't have too active of a microbial community because that's the predator. The prey is carbon. I push the biology, I will break organic matter. Science is coming out pretty solid on that, is that I can have too much biological activity because I don't have enough carbon being back to the soil. So if we do something activity, carbon is what's going to result as a downfall, and we get the ups and downs. I've been playing a lot with sugars lately. I don't know, anybody sprayed sugar in here or molasses? Nobody? Well, becoming a big deal is putting sugar and molasses on it, and the farmers always tell me it's like giving a kid a Mountain Dew. I don't know who the hell, I don't know who think that's a great idea of getting your kid a Mountain Dew before bedtime, but that's kind of what it does to the soil. It kicks it off. Activity. It runs rampant. You release a ton of nitrogen, which is good. We all want free nitrogen. And then the microbial population crashes and there's nothing left. It's a boom bust. You've run through all the easily decomposable carbon. And I've seen some folks up north. Now, I don't think y'all do, but I watched a guy who started out with organic matter on his farm of 7%. Y'all got any 7%ers out there? No. He started with 7%. And after 15 years of regenerative farming, adding sugars every single year for 15 years, he got down to a 4%. I don't think that's a good thing. What he was doing was burning through that easily soluble carbon and just kept pulling down his organic matter. Now, he got free nitrogen. He didn't have to fertilize that much, right? He didn't have to put on hardly any commercial fertilizer in that system. But he also went from an organic matter of 7 to an organic matter of 4. That in math is about 3,000 pounds of nitrogen he burned through in that organic matter that was released. So, it's a short term. If you guys want to hit it once, I know I got a lot of guys going, it's like, well, I'll put it on because it's cheap now and I'll just take the loss. We are trying to better understand the influence of sugar. And I'm not a big fan. Check strips. I'll hit this a little bit. Show hands, who's got corn, or is this all cotton? Any corn?
Yes.
Okay. Any sorghum? All right, fair enough. And by the way, I think I recognize some faces in there. So, I'm I'm a big fan of reference strips. When it comes to corn, comes to sorghum, I'm all about a 0. And when I say 0, I mean 0. Turn off that strip till unit for a second. And this is, you don't have to do anything with it. Think about this. If you walk out to a cornfield and you know you got a spot out there that has 0 nitrogen and it's 8 rows by 20 foot, right? I'm not saying take off acres. And you see that 0 at V6 or V8, you know that you are responsible for that crop's nitrogen probably 100%, because at V6 the crop's only used 30 or 40 pounds of N, and if it's showing up deficient by V6, that means the soil's not giving you anything. You've got to give it all. But if you also go out there and you have that same 0 and you go out at VT and you can't find that 0, you should not be putting any more fertility on that season. Don't go with that late season application via the pivot, because it don't need it. The crop's got all it needs. And so I can do some, depending on the crowd I'm in, I say it's napkin math. It's really barroom math, where I can say if that strip shows up at V6, V8, V10, we could back math using this curve right here to say, you know what, it's about here. So that means I used 40% of my nitrogen before it went deficient. This is about how much I had. I need to make sure I have another 150 pounds on to make it good. Don't need a sensor, don't need a satellite. I can do it with a sensor, I can do it with satellite. Also do it pretty low key, low tech, and get a lot of answers with the 0. If it's wheat, I do 0, and I think I've got some slides. I don't do 0, I do high nitrogen on wheat, I do high nitrogen on sorghum. I should have put it on here since they're sorghum guys. I've done a lot of sorghum work lately that shows that I want the majority of the sorghum, nitrogen on sorghum, to go on somewhere around 30 to 40 days after it ground. And I'm getting a lot more efficiency and a lot more yield out of the nitrogen going on then than pre-plant, making about a 10% increase. On the wheat side, I cannot show any data, irrigated or dry land, that says pre-plant nitrogen has any value in grain-only wheat. It has all the value in the world for dual purpose and graze out, but everything that I've got shows me that I lose money with nitrogen applied before January 1st in winter wheat. That nitrogen, even if it's cheap, doesn't have a return on investment that putting it on anytime basically after February 1st has. And there's a lot of stuff we can go in there. I know this isn't wheat centric. That's another talk and we have conversation. But that's a big deal. Okay. I'm transitioning. Does anybody want to ask a question about nitrogen? Because I will transition to other things. By the way, I see you flicking your sheets. Yeah, like I said, I did this. I sent that under a drug-induced coma when I sent those slide decks. So y'all I'll be showing something a little bit different. This isn't even in your slide deck, so don't worry about it. I bet you, show of hands, who've seen me do the ladder before? I think there's a couple guys in the back who might have seen this ladder before, but this is one where soil test is premium. Where's nitrogen on the ladder? It's near the top. We got to be thinking P and K and soil pH. Your soil pH, well, I deal with soil pHs from 4s to 8s. You got a pH of 4, I can help you. You got a pH, I can help you all too. Find a realtor and try to sell it and buy a pH of 7. Okay, that's about how I take the pHs of 8s is sell it and find something lower. I don't know if we give enough credit to our P and K as we should. Phosphorus is a corn thing, potassium's a cotton thing. I'm much less concerned about K in my corn, much more concerned about K in cotton. I'm much more concerned about phosphorus in corn than I am in my cotton, just because the way the plants take it up, the way they use it, and the way they need it. And a couple points. I expect every one of you does a potassium replacement option. More than likely, you get a soil test and you do replacement potassium and phosphorus. Is that right? For the most part, show of hands who does some sort of replacement. All right. My question would be, is it 100% replacement? Is it 40%? Is it 30%? How are you deciding what replacement rate to use? A lot of folks, if you've got, okay, who gets their Rex from like a Nutrient or a Helena or a Simplot or consultant. Anybody in here gets consultants to do their help with fertility recs? Couple, maybe. They're using a replacement. They're going soil test. They're going to be at this point, and they're going to do a maintenance of crop removal. And that maintenance probably should be much more adjusted to economics than it is. Meaning, crop price is good, I'm doing a 60 or 70% replacement. Crop price is poor, I'm probably pulling down my replacement. Just where do you need to be at? You don't need full replacement rate to hit maximum yield. You need sufficiency rate to hit maximum yield. Is there any straight no-till in here? Is anybody 100% no-till underwater? Strip till? Tillage? Okay, so we got a lot of people who just don't farm. That's fair enough. All right. It's okay. It's after you're having to listen to some goofus on Zoom. But one thing as we get into is we start talking about no-till, strip-till, reduced-till, and crop. Looking at this uptake, and I brought this back. This is corn uptake. Is the blue is grain, the green is flower spot. This is soybean. It's about the same for corn. Everything below the blue is staying on the field unless you bell it off. Everything blue is taken off the field. So on the nitrogen side, we pull a lot in off the field as grain, as fiber, as seed. We leave a lot of potassium on the field, especially if we're in a corn crop, in stover. And those numbers are pretty significant as you start looking at it. The uptake and the replacement is like, we will be pulling anywhere between 250 to 350 pounds of potassium easily with a high yielding crop. And most of that's left on the surface. Well, that means to be available so y'all, I'm going to assume you're harvesting October, November, some that time frame. When you put the next corn crop back in the ground, if you're corn on corn, how much of that residue, how much of those stalks, 100%? No. Even under strip till, you've got some back, but you have duff, you have residue. That residue has a bunch of potassium in it. And when we do nitrogen and fertilizer recs, we're assuming tillage is bringing that residue back in and breaking it down quicker, because if you till that cornfield, those leaves, those stalks are breaking down quicker, re-releasing the potassium back into the system. If you're no-till, you're leaving it all on the surface, which is great because you're maintaining and you're keeping your soil moisture, but you're stratifying that potassium all on that near surface that may not be where the roots need to be at. So these are just some numbers looking at a 300 bushel corn crop, about what's in the stover, what's in the grain. So 300 bushel corn is going to pull about 75 pounds of K off the field, but you're going to have about 200 to 210 pounds of potassium at near surface brought up. Year in and year out, you're really stratifying your potassium up high, which why in a strip till system makes a lot of sense. One, incorporate it back down, but deep banding K in that sit. We got to be aware of it. We got to be aware of the breakdown in that cycle and how it's getting the system. Also want to point this out. It's kind of an interesting thing at yield at the same rate that the upground is. So I would love to say that a 200 bushel corn crop has the same root shoot ratio as a 300 bushel, but it's not the case. So as you all are trying to move from 220, 250, 280, 300, you're doing it with a lot less root than you are per unit of forage than you are before. That root shoot ratio is starting to skinny up as you get more. That means we got to think more about how getting the nutrients that are needed in a mass demand into that plant in a short time. I'm also going to guess some of you farming in a heavy clay, or you have some clay at depth somewhere. Well, that heavy clay is going to also impact root growth. It's going to impact how much exploration those plants have impacting that uptake. And so we've got to think more about managing these things, that as we're pushing more, we are doing it with less roots, and so that's going to impact. So this conversation is all about, okay, how hard am I pushing yield? I've probably got to rethink. That does not mean foliar K. A 300 bushel corn crop is going to be using 3 to 5 pounds of K per day at peak demand. I can't do it foliar. I'm doing a lot of stuff in heavy ground, more so on the cotton side and soy side. I'm all in on top dressing with 0060 in heavier ground. I don't, regardless of the soil test potassium, because that heavy ground tends to limit root exploration, and I can't get enough K into the plant, and so I'm gonna have to top dress with about 60 pounds of K to really push my yields and get them to the next level. I don't see that as, but there is a chance you have some of those issues you can be looking at. Water does make it easier. I just put this slide in here as we think about this. But with water, we're increasing yield. We're increasing that uptake. We're breaking down at least you guys can break down the residue in season, but it's not dynamic. We're not slowly decomposing last year's residue all winter long and all spring long. It's years dry until the crop's back in, and you're usually pretty dry until about V6. You're pretty dry until about pinhead square. You really start hitting with the water, and so your breakdown of the previous year's residue is much later in the season. Maybe that's beneficial, and maybe it's not, but we really got to think about how all those things are cycling and being dynamic, regulating the nutrient cycle. I had a couple things. I want to share this. This was on another talk I did. I did a talk. Somebody asked me to do how do you do 300 bushel talk, and I said I don't have a freaking clue. I've only done it once. So I'll tell you the story of how I grew 300 bushel. It was normally planted in the high plains. This is out in Panhandle. I had treatments hit 305. My field averaged 297, which to me around that field had always been between 240. I had no starter because it was the in-season N and P stage, so it absolutely had no starter. It was dropped 32,000 population. The field was bulked out corn, so remember, so I'm a fertility specialist. I was needing to draw down the fertility. So the previous year I grew 200 bushel corn on 0 nitrogen to try to get a nice nitrogen response. This year I had insecticide with mites and fungicide. The big part was an in-range study. I hit 300 bushel corn with 100 pounds of nitrogen. The previous year, I grew 220 on 0 on bulk out corn. The only thing I can tell you is that the rain allowed that I run. I grew 180 bushel corn because we had early season wetness and the roots basically didn't grow anywhere. We didn't get good root action. So don't always tie yield with fertility. Know that there's a lot of things happening in that soil system. This is some stuff I'm throwing out there because I think it's really interesting as we look at it. Your country is something that I think will really benefit. This is out of Penn State, so I know it's up north. But they did work finding that there are hybrids of corn or varieties of corn that the roots just want to explore. Meaning, so there's certain plants that grew fewer roots that were deeper. So it didn't matter what you gave the crop, the roots grew deeper. Meaning that they were just searching out more. I think you're going to see more of your seed companies providing root phenotype structure along with their hybrid data so that you know what kind of rooting structure they have. And I want to tell you, a lot of companies are looking at doing a better job of understanding the root structure of the hybrids they're putting out, whether they advertise it or not. That is the new step in what I want to show you. This is one thing I'm kind of alluding to. I've seen this in corn, wheat, cotton, and sorghum, is that this was grown in a sandy pot. This is high nitrogen, this is low nitrogen, this is wheat. I've seen it reproduced in all those other crops. These plants, crazy, That short root has the exact same mass as this root. What happens, we find out, is that there are some varieties that when signaled a nitrogen stress, and that's not without nitrogen, it's just lower nitrogen, the plant gets signaled, it sends a root out deeper. It doesn't basically make more, it just goes deeper and explores the system more. And so, man, we're really starting to do some screening to try to understand this. We had some cotton cultivars that we could triple root length in 7 days. Now, kind of cool on the cotton side was that those cotton cultivars were pretty consistent. If I asked the agronomic traits, the salesman would say they are rank cotton. They are the cultivars we have to have PGRs on. There are also many of them were the good nematode tolerant cultivars. So combining rank growing plants by that, there were some cotton cultivars and corn that if you stressed with, basically gave up the thing. It's like, screw it, I'm done. I'm going home for the day. I can't get nitrogen, so I'm out. So it's not something you do on every field, but starting to screen, there's some definite variety differences. On wheat, it's really cool. Same thing with sorghum. We can shorten the crop by a couple inches. On the wheat side, we are significantly reducing tillers and heads, but significantly increasing grain by 20 to 40% by having a stressed early season crop. What happens is we put more efforts into the main tillers and secondary tillers, and we put more berries on. So we have less heads, but the heads we have more berries. Y'all ever been in the combine and get a lot of sucker heads that are about a half an inch tall thinking there's no way that grain's staying in the combine? We're basically getting rid of those suckers and those tillers. Same thing on sorghum. We're making heads that are filling out more fully, thinking more like a corn crop. I don't want corn plants with 3 ears. I want one corn plant with one big honking ear on it, and I want a lot of those plants. And thinking about that in other crops. I've got some cotton stuff I can't show right now, but we're also showing in cotton that we're repositioning the boll load with delaying nitrogen in cotton, which is kind of cool. We don't know, we got to see how that does on efficiency, but definitely got some stuff in cotton that shows stress nitrogen later is yielding more, higher quality, better color, better mic, but it's also repositioning what bolls make it harvest. My recommendations for y'all this year: do not envy anybody that has to do deep nitrogen, but I thought I had it on here. I don't. I've got a chart where I sampled cotton fields and corn fields in the high plains, and around between 2 foot and 4 foot, I was finding on average 150 to 400 pounds of nitrogen. I'm telling you, if you know you've got 150 pounds of nitrogen at 2 foot deep, you think you might cut back on your N rate a little bit? You ought to if you aren't. So, I mean, if you're looking at the budget saying, can I cut my fertilizer budget, it might be worth hollering at somebody and getting a couple 6 to 12 or 6 to 18 inch soil samples and just seeing what's down to that depth and accounting for that, because cutting your NREC by 50 to 60 pounds, that's going to cut your costs by $30 to $40 per acre. And boy, this year that might be helpful when it comes to paying things. Get a zero-in check out there and see what's going on. I'm all about on nitrogen and becoming more so on potassium, about in season being reactive to the environment. If I've got the environment, I've got yield, I've got economics, I've got weather, I'm going to put the nitrogen into it. If it stops raining, gets hotter than Hades, I'm going to back off and say, you know what? I'm done with input, let's just see what happens. And maybe that's what happens if we get down to $2 corn. Do you really want 250 nitrogen down on $2 corn, or do you want to say, you know what, let's roll with 150 and see what happens? So it's just one of those things. I like being reactive. And by the way, does anybody sell wide drops in here? Does anybody have wide drops? I really like redneck wide drops. There's a lot of ways we can do wide drops on sprayers. That's nothing but PVC pipe or hydraulic hose or things. We got a lot of guys that do that, and it's a pretty effective and efficient thing to do. This is one of our guys up here in Oklahoma has dropped down and done PVC. Other guys run hydraulic hoses with a lead weight at the bottom. and have been pretty successful. That's what I had. I actually told more stories, so it went longer than I thought, and I was ready for nap time and get up and have a break. But are there any questions?
So did I understand you right, Brian, on the one where you got 300 bushels, you put 70 pounds on? And the year before, you
Yeah.
didn't put any on that, you got 200 something?
Yes.
So why would putting hydrogen on at all?
Well,
that residual in the soil?
and that ground took, so I took that ground over, and it took 5 years of farming that ground on a corn wheat rotation to get the first response to nitrogen. That's because they were using a 1.2 pounds per per bushel with a yield goal that was probably beyond farmers' ability, and they had built up a significant bank in the soil.